All right, we're going to be talking about the quadratic formula today, so let's go to work. Let's start by talking about what is the quadratic formula. Well, the way we remember the quadratic formula is do a little song. Repeat after me, please. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yeah, you guys are terrible. You didn't sing at all. It's all right. You were singing in your head. I could see. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that over 2a. That is the quadratic formula. Now, for starters, let's talk about standard form of a quadratic. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Yes? So once we have a quadratic in standard form, we just take those coefficients and the constant and plug it into that formula, and it'll give us our solutions. And I'm going to do a couple of those with you. Okay? Let's start by, let's go x squared plus 6x plus, 8. And of course, that equals to 0, because anytime that we're dealing with these quadratics, we want to set them equal to 0 so we can find the solutions or the zeros of the quadratic, and that's what we're doing right here. Okay, so let's keep working. So in other words, there's a 1 in front of there. That's going to be my A. The 6 is going to be my B, and the 8 is going to be my C. So I simply plug those things into this formula. Now, this negative sign, sometimes we read negative signs as opposite. So the first thing I could do is take the opposite of B. Well, B I can see is 6. So opposite of B would be negative 6 plus or minus the square root of B, which is 6, squared minus 4 times A, and A we can see is 1, times C, which is 8, all over 2 times A, which in this case again is 1. And that's it. You plug those numbers, A, B, and C, into the formula, and then we will simplify and solve. Okay, so let's keep going. So I have negative 6. I'm not going to do anything with that yet. Plus or minus. Now 6 squared is 36. Minus 4 times 1 is 4. Times 8 is 32. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. Let's keep going. Let's simplify underneath that radical. And that would be negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 36 minus 32 is 4 over 2. Now, is there anybody out there can tell me what this plus or minus deal is? What's that plus or minus thing? Well, that's actually two signs sitting on top of each other. And what it does is basically tells us, hey, we got two problems here. We have negative 6 plus the square root of 4 over 2, and we got negative 6 minus the square root of 4 over 2. Is everybody with me? I'm just working on my plugging and chugging. Who can tell me what's the square root of 4? Wow, everybody's so quick. The square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so let me replace that. The square root of 4 is 2 in both of those cases. Okay. So now think of it like this. Negative 6 plus 2 is a negative 4 divided by 2, which is a negative 2. So there's one of my solutions. And then negative 6 minus 2 is a negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is a negative 4. And there are my two solutions, or x-intercepts. Now, I could prove that any number of ways. I could go back up here to our original equation, and I could factor it, or I could complete the square, and do all kind of cool things to show you that the same answers. But that's the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is simply knowing this formula and then being able to plug A, B, and C into that formula and simplify. And it will tell you the solutions of any quadratic formula. Now, Thursday and Friday, we talked about this square root and simplifying a radical. And we did that because these numbers, this which was 4 this time, is not always a nice, easy, perfect square like that. Okay? And that's why we need to be able to simplify that radical. So I'm going to do another one, and I'm going to make it up here off the top of my head, but it's not going to be real pretty. Okay? Before I get into that, I want to give you one more. I want to break down this negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I want you to realize that there's a couple pieces of information that are in this quadratic formula that are important to us that we've used in the past. If I just looked at this right here, negative b over 2a, you seen that somewhere before? You absolutely have. That is x equals negative b over 2a. We used that when we were working with quadratics and just trying to graph them. Okay? And then this other thing over here, this b squared minus 4ac, that's called the discriminant. Discriminant. Okay. Discriminant tells us some information. Okay, what the discriminant tells us, if the discriminant is greater than 0, there are 2 real solutions. If the discriminant is equal to 0, there is 1 real solution. And then if the discriminant is less than 0, there are no real solutions. Okay, now that's all cool information. That's not something you're going to use a ton of until you get into some upper level mathematics, and I realize that, but it's something that we like to introduce here. Okay, and you're going to practice that in your homework. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about in a minute. Okay, let's see if I can come up with a equation that's not going to be so friendly or not so nice. Let's go x squared plus 7x. No, I don't want that. Let's go 8x plus 5. Okay. And that is equal to 0 or equal to y or equal to f of x. Doesn't matter. Any of those work. Right now I'm going to set it equal to 0. Okay. Before I even get into solving it, what would my x value be of my vertex? Well, that's where I would use that formula. So here it would be x equals the opposite of b, which is a negative 8 over 2 times a, and a is 1 in this case. So it would be negative 8 over 2 or negative 4. So my axis of symmetry, hadn't heard that word in a while, right? My axis of symmetry will be x equals negative 4. Now, I wonder how many solutions this thing's going to have. Well, that's where I can use b squared minus 4ac, which in this case would be 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, right? 4ac. Well, that would be 64 minus 24, 44. So since it's 44, it's greater than 0, so it has 2 real solutions. And that's how you use that information to find out what the axis of symmetry would be, or the x value of the vertex. X value. Oops, I need to cross that T. It's L. X value of the vertex. Okay, now let's use it. Let's go back to red and use it to find our solutions now. So I've got negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, all over 2 times 1. So negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 44. Remember, I did that work over here, right? All over 2a. Now, this 44, am I going to be able to simplify that? No, it's not a perfect square, is it? Is there a perfect square that goes into it? Can I simplify that radical? Can I simplify the square root of 44? Yeah, I can. 4 goes into it, right? So I could rewrite this as 4 times 11. That gets me 44, right? So that's the same thing as the square root of 4 times the square root of 11, yeah? This is the stuff that you learned over the weekend, right? So what's the square root of 4? It's 2. So 2 times the square root of 11. So in other words, I can plug this right there, and I have negative 8 plus or minus 2 square root of 11 over 2, because a was 1, so we've already said that's 2. Cool? Now, here's the cool part. I'm done. That is the most exact answer. I know that you can't read it and you don't know what that actually means, but that's the most exact answer for what the solutions are to this thing. Now, we could use our calculator and go negative 8 plus 2 times the square root of 11 divided by 2 and so on, but I don't want to go there. I literally want you to leave it like this. This using the quadratic formula, we're going to use it in this homework, okay? But you're not really going to use the quadratic formula much until you get to algebra 2. So this is just kind of an introduction to it, okay? So if it's freaking you out a little bit, I only need you to do 1 or 2 problems where you plug it in, chug it out. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So that's the quadratic formula and how you use it. Your homework is going to be, it's listed on your classroom. I believe it's 2 through 24.